Hello, I'm Neal Romanek, and welcome to Feed's Cybersecurity Roundtable. Cybersecurity is a bigger and bigger issue. If you haven't been attacked yet, you will be eventually. And to a certain extent, it's a matter of being prepared for the eventuality when it comes. Today, on a roundtable, we have Simon Spanswick, who's the chief executive of the Association for International Broadcasting. Phil Myers, who's the CTO at broadcast technology company Lawo, and John Mailhot. Did I pronounce that correctly, John?
Close enough. Maya.
Mailhot?
Mhm.
Okay, who's a systems architect for IP convergence at Imagine Communications. So thank you very much, guys, for joining us. And I'd like to actually start, Simon, with you at the Association for International Broadcasting, and maybe you can give us a one-liner about what it is that you do. You've done a lot of work around cybersecurity, especially as it affects news agencies and big broadcasters. Can you kind of just tell us what you guys have been talking about, the work you've been doing, and how you see the landscape in terms of cybersecurity and broadcast right now?
Sure. Just to give you the 30-second overview of the Association for International Broadcasting, or AIB, slightly more wieldy acronym that we use. We've been around since 1993, and it's the trade association for broadcasters working internationally. It started off coming out of international radio because back in 93, there wasn't very much international television. But now, of course, we cover everything from radio through television and digital platforms. One of the pieces of work that we got involved with some years ago was cybersecurity, because it was starting to raise its head. We were seeing more and more problems for a lot of broadcasters, and some of them came to us and said, how can we share knowledge? How can we work together? How can we improve the situation? We've got some big members. We've got the BBC, we've got the ABC in Australia, and we've got lots of medium tier and smaller broadcasters. Not all of them are quite as well resourced in terms of dealing with the challenges of cybersecurity. And that's why knowledge sharing between different broadcasters is so important. And also trying to find practical ways as the problems of the attack surface increases, particularly over the last 18 months of the pandemic, where everybody has been working from home. And so you're inserting lots of extra points in the system that you're using to broadcast that can come under attack. And home security systems tend not to be quite as robust as those that are employed within broadcast studio complexes. So that's really where we've come from, and we've been doing a lot of work. We've been working with the UK National Cybersecurity Centre, which is part of GCHQ, the government signals monitoring station. We've been working with ANSSI, the French security service. We've been talking to other agencies around the world, because all of them are worried about the possible effects on critical national infrastructure, which broadcasters represent. And I can go more a little later on as to what practical steps we're doing, but that gives you the overview. There's a lot of worry out there, a lot of concern. Not everybody has the tools to be able to cope with how to address the increasing cybersecurity problem.
That's great. Thank you. Just a follow-up on that. So you talked about sort of worry and concern, but what's the problem? So does that mean, does that mean that somebody's going to read my emails if I work at a big, if I work at, I'm trying to, I'm going to give away my question, but if I work for a major French broadcaster, or is there going to be that my server is going to go down? I mean, what are the stakes, and what actually can happen in some of these situations?
The problems are multitudinous. I've been in some cybersecurity centers within broadcasters, watching the number of attacks that are going into them all the time from different parts of the world. There are certainly nation states working against broadcasters, and they're very well resourced, and that increases the level of threat. So you asked what the issues are. Is it people reading emails? Undoubtedly, which could compromise in the news environment, sources, stories being compiled, contributors that might not want to be named. You've got the issue of attacks on playout, making sure that the material you put in is the right material, and when it gets played out, it is not going to cause major embarrassment with a modified clip of something going out to a nation on a newscast, for example. All those are real issues that broadcasters are grappling with. And there's also now, I mentioned the working from home issue, we've also got the issue around the Internet of Things. And this is another big issue because we're all connected with these. We've got them we bring them into work, we've got them on the desk, and we've seen over the last few weeks the Pegasus story, where journalists' telephones have been compromised along with presidents and ministers and human rights activists. These are real and present dangers. And so the potential for attack is across a whole range of equipment, services, systems.
So as I kind of started to give away there, it was TV 5 Monde. Is that the?
Yeah, in
that
Paris.
Was, they were taken right out, weren't they?
They were taken right out.
That was about
and
5 years ago or something.
Yeah, and their website was blocked. Their entire systems were trashed. The French security services went in there, did a cleanup operation. They weren't allowed, staff working in TV5 weren't allowed to connect to the internet for around 6 months. And I cannot imagine how you can work in this day and age without going online. And it's cost them 80, 90 million euros to recover and put in place the systems to prevent a recurrence of that.
Amazing. So kind of moving on to the maybe the other side of the sort of technology side. Phil and John, can we hear from you what your customers who, you're doing a lot of work installing systems, creating workflows, creating infrastructures for broadcasters. What has been, first of all, I guess your customers, the broadcasters that you work with, what has then been their take about security? Do you have a sense that they have an awareness of the threat, and how are you working with them to raise awareness or just make things safer? Do you want to start with that, Phil?
Yeah, I can do. So I would say over the last 2 or 3 years, we've definitely seen a big increase in the requests from the customer side. So if I think if I was going to look at a lot of the RFIs, RFPs, RFQs from the last 18 months, pretty much all of them have a section dedicated to cybersecurity. What I would say with a lot of the customers is they are, whilst they know it's important to their business, they don't truly understand the impact that it brings to the business. So as Simon was saying, that there's some really fundamentals. So I think once somebody's in your system and they have access to private information, it's not only your emails, it's potentially also payroll, everything else that's associated with an individual. And as you know, there are some very strict guidelines in Europe around protection of general data. So I think that's, from a business perspective, it brings that challenge. From a content perspective, you also put at risk content that has a lot of value finding its way out into torrents or down into the other mainstream ways of getting content, which could be well ahead of time. So as you know, a lot of the big US shows get distributed to a lot of the European broadcasters well in advance of their live date. And so just to have that content find its way out of the facility at the highest possible quality becomes a massive issue for them, specifically from a revenue perspective. But then you also have issues, as Simon related to, content being changed in your supply chain. So content that's being cached and distributed to your playout servers may very well not be the content that you intended to put out on that channel. And it could be propaganda related. It could just be done in order to damage the brand of that broadcaster. But then there's the kind of the other side of it, which is you have somebody enter the system with malware to either do ransomware, so effectively lock the system to prevent you from operating. And that comes with not only huge financial costs, but a huge other burdens to the business. Or they come and they create a denial of service, whether by themselves or as a group, which effectively brings your operation to a grinding halt. So I think there's really a lot of aspects here. And if you were to ask a broadcaster which one worries them the most, I'm sure they'd tell you all of them, because once they're in your network, then you have to think about how you're going to have a measure to mitigate all of that. And I think from a broadcast vendor perspective, it's quite challenging, because obviously we supply technology to a lot of broadcasters, but we don't supply all of the technology. And I think that's the important part. This really is very much foremost an industry approach, but also depending on the technology you have deployed in your facility, it may well be that some of the technology can simply not be secured. And then you've got to think about investment in CapEx to replace that technology over a period of time.
I mean, I think the key thing when I talk with customers about cybersecurity is really that the fact that we're doing a lot more of the processing or the distribution of video using IP right now has really very little to do with the cybersecurity threat footprint. The cybersecurity threat footprint is mostly around the enterprise. So in a sense, a broadcaster is not so different than any other similarly sized enterprise business in terms of needing to have good cybersecurity practices, firewalling, VPNs, multi-factor authentication, all the sort of basic IT hygiene. I live near New York. I have friends who work in the IT parts of banks and trading institutions. And we talk, and they have obviously very similar concerns, billions of dollars of transactions going through systems. They're quite keen on keeping those highly secured. But there's two differences between the media industry and the banks and trading firms. One is that the media industry is reporting on world leaders and nation states and so forth. And so in effect, they can sometimes create ire that can inspire nation state attacks. And this is not unheard of, right? So if you look at some of the attacks that happened in Australia or Sony Pictures or some other things, those were nation state attacks that were in some way inspired by content on the channel. So that's a way that media companies are different from banks. But another way is that if you go to visit the IT, central infrastructure part of a bank or a trading firm, you need to get like two different people to approve you even walking into the building, and then you're escorted the entire time. Whereas if you show up, with a hoodie and a USB stick and say, hey, I'm the replacement editor for a show, suddenly, you could probably talk your way into sitting at a desk with an edit station pretty quickly in some broadcasters. We have a very transient staff model in our industry. We have a lot of freelancers, a lot of gig workers, hundreds of interns every summer. And the human threat surface of the television industry is very different than the human threat surface of a bank or a trading firm. So that's a way in which the media industry is extraordinarily different in practice. So at any rate, the human threat surface of a bank or a trading firm is much smaller than the human threat surface of a media company, especially one with a lot of producers and editors and freelancers coming and going all day long. So that's really where IT security, plain old enterprise security tools are the first line of defense for the media industry. And the good news is that they're not unique to television. We might have to do a better job of deploying some of them because of the nature of our workforce. But the regular tools that secure every mid-sized enterprise are there and are the first most important thing for media companies to also deploy.
John, does that actually exist in terms of the way that legacy systems can be interfaced with new systems? Because that's one of the key crunch points for some of our members, certainly. The way that you bolting things on to existing systems to make new things work. and the lack of security because things need to talk from one to the other?
Well, I think within a plant, so a lot of IT security is around perimeter defenses and having firewalls and keeping the bad stuff out. But even within an enterprise, it's smart to have some additional containerization inside the enterprise. And so the approach that many customers take who have legacy equipment that maybe isn't as secure as it ought to be if it was new, is that they'll build firewalled regions within their own enterprise where the legacy equipment largely lives. And this serves two purposes. It contains damage. So suppose an intern takes a USB and sticks it in the edit station, infects the edit station. You'd like to contain that damage to some section of the enterprise, right? And in particular, you might argue, which way is that firewall protecting that's around the core broadcast infrastructure? Well, it's protecting it from other things in the plant. So you make sure that the core area that maybe has some legacy equipment, that it's very well firewalled off from the rest of the plant. And so things in the rest of the plant that have some business interacting with it, they're on the ACL whitelist and they can get through. But other, the edit station in Bay 13 probably has no business talking to the transmission encoder.
It's interesting.
I would echo that.
Phil.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, you just have to look at an OB truck, for example, that might be connected now to a facility. You have switches in the production area. Anybody can come up with a device and plug into it. And to just, hey, I need to get internet. So they'll come up, take a laptop, plug it in. They might go to a replay machine, plug in a USB because they think they need to get some graphics loaded onto it. It really comes down to the point John made about if you were to think about a bank, you wouldn't be able to just walk into the heart of that facility and just connect up. But in a broadcast, it's common practice that you would walk into an MCR or CAR and plug up an SDI connection, or in more modern times, you would plug up a network connection to a device without thinking about the implications that might well bring to your facility. But security has been really a challenge for a long time. Even if you go back 10, 15 years, when we started deploying networked edit systems and media asset management, and a lot of the server technology that has been around for the last 10, 15 years, they've been running hardening OSs on that to prevent you from writing stuff to the boot drive, just to prevent that the devices can get into a state that avoids it from being used. And I think there's two aspects. There's a technology change, but there is also a process and a human impact to this, because I think you have to say to somebody, actually, you can't just go and connect to the network. Actually, from a technology perspective, it's better to protect the network. But in the event that people come in, you can only do so much. And I think you have to attack it from both sides. That says, okay, I have a process for how I can connect devices into my secure network. I also have processes, for example, that if a port's not used, it's shut. Or I use IT technology like Radius, for example, to lock a port, so that only devices that are authenticated at the physical level can come into the network. And I totally agree with John. We shouldn't try and reinvent the wheel for technology that has been widely adopted and used in much bigger markets than we currently have in media and entertainment.
Yeah, and I think another thing is to recognize and accommodate the needs. So like the need for people to connect to the internet around the truck, or even in the broadcast center, very real need, right? The cell reception is terrible in the basement of a large building. So create a guest Wi-Fi, put it in an appropriate zone, and that'll make everybody happy because it'll be completely isolated from your plant, but it'll let people do what they're trying to do, which is to track the story they're covering. Yeah. So, it's not as though these technologies are even new. The enterprise security industry is huge and growing, and there's experts and there's expertise, and the first line of defense in television industry is to use the things that other industries have learned and to apply them carefully and well. But I think also the key is really a management key, which is we have to treat it like it's important. So, there's been some history in the television industry, maybe between broadcast engineers and the IT people, and they didn't always, weren't always on the same page or even sometimes the same team. And the reality is that the two disciplines are increasingly intertwined and interconnected, and they need to not just find peace, but find successful collaboration. And enterprise security is probably the most important area where they have to work together for the common good of the enterprise. And that means that employees, creative staff, engineering staff, are going to have to put up with, whatever that means, things being slightly harder than they used to be in the name of having cybersecurity.
But so it does sound like it's you know, that it's kind of a cultural issue. And I was just thinking, as you're kind of going through all that it's almost like, it sounds like there's a kind of a perfect storm, but there's a lot of issues that seem specific to the media industry that are vulnerabilities. That idea that, you know, I have to have it now, however you need to do it. I don't care if you cut corners, but we have to have it now. And we're going to use whoever we can get right now. Doesn't matter if we've worked with them, you know, in the past. We'll just grab someone and bring them in here and get that job done. And then with that combined with this high value content, you know, that it would seem like you really have to, that there does need to be a culture shift. Simon, what is your take on that? Is there complacency, or is there an understanding of the threats, or are people willing to make those changes?
I think it depends on the culture of the organization. But there is a problem, I think, at board level often, that cybersecurity is put on the too hard pile, and people are not employing a sort of top-down culture of the need for cybersecurity. And that's one of the biggest issues, I think, in our industry, that it's not seen as the be-all and end-all of everything until there's another TV5. But we saw Nine Network in Australia a few weeks ago, having moved into its swanky new headquarters in Sydney. Their newsroom was taken off, and they had to resort to putting running orders on whiteboards and digging out a typewriter that hadn't been used for the last 22 years just to get the news out. So this is a real issue that exists, and until it's taken seriously by the most senior management and executives in an organization, it isn't going to become part of an organization's mantra, alongside making the best programs or finding ways to be carbon neutral and those sort of slightly sexier things, because cybersecurity isn't a sexy topic. It is for those who are deeply involved in cybersecurity, but for your average media exec, it's just put to one side because I don't understand it. I don't understand what the problem is, and why can't somebody just solve it?
So what about working with, I mean, as you kind of all alluded to, that, you know, there are more and more devices connected, there are more and more, you know, types of technologies that are having to interact and interface with each other. Remote working has become a big thing. So what about those kind of gaps in the chain, and particularly with working with other vendors? How are you? What strategies are there for kind of keeping the whole workflow safe? You know, not just inside your arena as a broadcaster, but how you're also interfacing with other companies, other vendors, and people outside your kind of your own.
Yeah, we always start with the first approach, which is you should do really an audit of your facility, and you know where the risks are, because I think as a customer, it's always good to know where your potential risks are and the severity of your risks. As a vendor, it becomes really challenging because you might supply, for example, like we do, an overarching control system, but actually you might find that a lot of the devices that sit underneath that control system span the last 5, 10, 15 years. And actually the reality is you're not going to be able to secure them. And then it comes at multiple levels. And I think the approach we've taken with customers is look at the entire infrastructure that you have, understand where your risks are, understanding what risks you can do, like John mentioned with some of the legacy equipment. If you can shorten the plane to make the failure plane as small as possible. Some customers do that by effectively putting SDI air bricks around that infrastructure, so only content goes in and out and no data. But you should also look not only at the edge devices, but also look at the application layer. So a lot of systems tend to be very monolithic as such, and not as redundant as you would expect. So you can also look at the application layer and how a vendor designs and architects the products to ensure even smaller failure planes or security risk was inside the product itself. And I think the challenge as we look at the IP landscape is most of these systems are multi-vendor solutions. So, we don't make cameras, we don't make production switches, we don't make replay servers, we don't make playout servers, we don't make graphics. And so I've already eliminated quite a lot of very key elements you'd find in most infrastructure. However, we might talk to every one of those products, and we might provide some of the IP infrastructure around it. And I think that from a vendor perspective, you can for sure take responsibility for your own technology, but it does require that, at least from a customer perspective, you're aware of where all the risks are in areas and also by vendor.
Right. And again, I'll go back to the mantra of the enterprise security has provided tools for these kinds of challenges. There's very little of this is unique to television. There is a lot of legacy equipment with legacy protocols that are not secured. But most of those protocols could run over either a secure socket or a secure tunnel or a VPN or other things. So again, the IT industry has built a nice layered architecture that we live in. And this actually is what's made all these working from home arrangements possible, is that you can extend a VPN tunnel from some part of your enterprise to somebody's home. And that's how we do it, right? And that VPN tunnel is quite secure. It extends the envelope of security all the way to that person's computer, and it can insert policies on that person's computer about what other things it can connect to. And this is just standard practice. This is how working from home worked before the pandemic, and all we've done is scale up. So the number of Cisco AnyConnect clients or equivalent other services has gone up massively. But the core technologies are well proven out of how to extend a security perimeter through a VPN tunnel and so forth. But again, it comes to designing the facility and the workflow. I think there was a thought process in the television industry for a long time that it was about protecting the content, and that security was about security of content. And there's an important element there, don't get me wrong. Your example of, could I substitute a different version of a news story and the wrong one goes to air? That'd be a really powerful hack to do, right? But as we learned in the like the Sony Pictures example, and later even in the 9 newsroom, it wasn't about content. It was about getting to people's emails and calendars, and who did the CEO meet with last week, and what was the topic of the meeting, things like that are far more damaging in some ways than a content gaffe. So they're both important, but I think we maybe as an industry had an outsized importance in our minds about securing the content versus the really also significant need to secure the enterprise as a whole.
That's interesting, because even in actually putting together this roundtable, and when at Feed we've talked about, we're doing something on cybersecurity, the responses we always get back are that, it's an anti-piracy roundtable, or that's kind of the first thing that people come back with, and it is, is some of the problem almost the broadcast industry needed to come down to earth and just, as you said, treat itself like any other business, and is it in some ways you're making it a bit too complicated, just to make sure that you've got solid IT people who know what they're doing. They don't have to be broadcast specialists in order to do some of this stuff.
I think sorry, go on, John.
I was going to say, you do have to do exactly that. Treat it like an enterprise, treat it importantly, hire good IT people, and actually listen to what they say. But I'll also say that my experience with our customer base is that they are, and they have, and this is where the focus is coming from. So as Phil mentioned, every RFP we get now has cybersecurity questions, and if the answers we give aren't very good, they let us know. I mean, there's an expectation that new equipment is going to meet modern requirements. Now, how you manage legacy equipment and how you protect that, that's a special little design consideration. But definitely the expectation in the television industry now is that current equipment meets current requirements with respect to cybersecurity.
Does working in the cloud affect any of this? Is it easier? Are there security wise, or are there more problems, or is it just really not actually an issue?
It's easier because the cloud deployments all tend to be new deployments that are designed to operate in the cloud. And if you operate in the cloud, basically, if you use any of the standard Amazon APIs or anything else, they're designed to be secure from the first day. So there's no legacy entanglements or legacy protocols to worry about in the cloud. Everything is kind of designed with current technology and current standards to be secure from day one. And there's also an inherent segmentation of things in the cloud. So for example, if I put my playout operation in the cloud, it's sort of by definition in its own little zone there. So even if it gets compromised somehow, which would be very hard, even if that happened, it doesn't have the same interconnectedness to my plant on the ground as if it was just in the next rack over on the ground. There's an inherent set of gaps and firewalls between those two things.
I don't think you get away from the people discussion, and we see it with a lot of our customers. And most customers that we've spoken to are either in the process of looking at how to restructure their broadcast and IT engineering, or some of them actually have already done that process as they've rolled out, because they've realized that by just introducing an IP infrastructure into their facility, it provides these vulnerabilities, and someone has to take responsibility for it. And historically in the past, you've always had this clash of, well, if it's a network, the IT department should take responsibility of it. And it's a network, but it's a broadcast piece network. Oh, well, the broadcast guys should own it. And now it's really much seen as a converged network. And so it has to be jointly owned to be responsible for. Because not only on that network do you have your live professional media on there, you've got all of your near real-time content. And as John alluded to, we've opened secure sockets out into many regions over the last 18 months to allow people to get content in and out of the system. So I think there has to be a certain approach to say, okay, it's a joint responsibility. The question on cloud is, as John alluded to, yes, it's very secure. However, you still need to take care for the content that's in the cloud, and you have to take care for what's your failure plan in the event that, for example, an Amazon region was to have a denial of service, or are you running it in another region? So I think it still brings the same planning. It's just a slightly different approach to it. But I come back to it. You have to really start with understanding where are the issues, where are the potential risks in your facility, because it's expensive either way. Because once you've been hacked, you can always look back in hindsight and say, "Wish I'd spent the money." And you can also say upfront, it's quite expensive to replace pieces of equipment that function quite well today, but are maybe not secure enough for the future. And it's finding that balance, I think, is the key.
Is one of the issues that broadcasters all think that they're unique and want to spec things in different ways, or they think they need to spec things in different ways, instead of other industries that might, perhaps like the finance industry, where they don't think they're quite so unique as an individual broadcaster in country A or country B?
Again, I think what we see from customers, they all have different requirements. Some have an in-house IT team, some have an out-house, some have consultants consult on the IT infrastructure and the measures they put in place. But at the end of it, it comes down, I think if you were to look back 5-10 years ago, people would assume you could build an air gap around it and just hope for the best. And I think now the reality is you have to come with a plan that says, what happens when I do have this issue? What are my processes I put in place to take care of it? And what are the short-term resolutions I can put in place, and what are the long-term ones? Because it does come with cost. And unfortunately, if you do nothing, it also comes with cost.
So I'm sorry, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, I'm not sure. Historically, broadcast engineering, yes, every facility was very unique and was unique for its own reason and so forth. And there's a long history of that in television. It's always a balance of importance, right? Because you know, every time you make something secure, inherently you're limiting access to it and you're providing some bumps in the road, and it creates friction points for sometimes the content professionals who just want to cut their show. So it is a constant management focus to assert and believe and drill in the importance of maintaining a secure workplace from a, you know, from an IT security perspective. It's not, you know, but it is being taken seriously. I think there's plenty of examples. Early on, I think maybe in your run up to this, you mentioned the idea of, you know, people don't believe in this until they've been attacked. But I'll tell you, your enterprise is under attack every single day. The basic firewalls and things that you have up, if you get to looking at the logs of those and see how many random people, organizations, hackers, you know, stand up basic hacking kit tools and just start poking at every address in the internet, and oh, something I've heard of, like a television company, oh, I'll go point my thing at them. Maybe I'll get lucky. You know, that it's bugs on a windshield. I mean, the number of attacks every single day on every single enterprise is staggering. And those are just the amateur, clumsy ones.
Yeah, I'll thoroughly agree with you there, because I mean, we're a small organization, but when you look at all the people trying to get into our static IP addresses, it's phenomenal, and they're probing all the time. And you just think, well, are these actual real people, or are they bots that are doing it, or who is actually behind all this? Because the quantity of attacks is truly staggering, isn't it?
So I mean, Phil kind of brought that up. Like, then you know, what do you do when you've been attacked? So how do you monitor and or how are broadcasters monitoring and detecting when those attacks occur, or when they become major threats? You know, is there obviously there must be automated systems in place for that? Do you need a dedicated person to sort of stand on the parapets, or what are the best ways to sort of learn when you're in trouble?
They're pretty standard enterprise tools. I mean, most, you know, there is in every organization, there should be a CISO, you know, Chief Information Security Officer. They have some responsibility for overall cybersecurity footprint and defense mechanisms. There's an on-call mechanism in the IT organizations. You know, you know, IT is not a one-man band, you know, some consultant that, you know, set up a few things. It's if you're an organization of a certain size, it's a part of the team, and it's a 24/7 operation, just like broadcast operations. And, you know, because you're under attack all the time. I mean, it's a question of, does the attack get anywhere? You know, most of them don't, but a few of them can get a toehold, right? And then they get another toehold. And even though, you know, you might think, oh, I got attacked, you could be breached and not know it for months, right? Because most attacks are latent. You know, they're just waiting. And then there's a whole, you know, I'm sure there's a whole black market bidding war for, hey, who's got a toehold in broadcaster X? They just ticked me off. So there's all kinds of interior work you do, scanning machines and so forth. That's, you know, the secondary mechanism behind those perimeter defenses.
I think that's the key. Is you hope they don't get through the first perimeter, and then you hope there's a perimeter inside there also, which you can act as a inner firewall. But ultimately you must have a process that the reality is at some point somebody will get into your facility. And so what does that mean? Do you move to another facility, a disaster recovery, and keep the operation going? Do you have a dedicated part of facility which is air gapped, which is protected even inside an inner perimeter? And I think that's generally the role of a CIO, is to say, okay, we have all these defenses, and if we get through this one, this is what we do. We get through this one, this is what we do. And it's about providing business continuity, because for a broadcaster, there has to be some level of business continuity in the same way that a national disaster was to hit the facility itself. You've got to know what you're going to do if something happens. And I think you saw in the Channel 9 that they had to take very quick measures to keep the operation running. And they were able to do that. But it could have gone a lot further than that, where it could have taken out the entire network. And I think these are really some of the challenges. And I would say not every customer we speak to understands what they would have to do in the event that it would go to that extreme. But I think as we see more and more with requests from customers, it's clear as an industry, it is about an exchange of information, because we have a certain amount of knowledge on the vendor side, and the customers also have a certain amount of knowledge on their side, which comes not only from their broadcast operation, but also from, as John mentioned, the enterprise side. And I think you have to have that approach of working through it together. But I can tell you, as John alluded to, the responses in RFPs are scrutinized, because customers want to know, okay, what are you doing to take care of this, to be reassured that the facility is going to be as bestly secured as possible.
Are we also talking about, like, does the same apply, and how we've been talking about this, to kind of broadcasters regardless of size? Because we're talking, it seems like a lot of the conversation we're having is about broadcasters with a decent amount of resource, but as we know, you could be potentially, it could be a very influential news organization just running something on YouTube, or you could be a local station or something, or maybe you're serving a niche interest of some kind, which may even make you more of a target or something. So are basically these kind of defenses and security measures and precautions something that applies universally, or are some people in a better position to defend themselves than others?
I think definitely some people are better resourced and are more aware of the issues and have done more work to protect themselves, as both John and Phil have said. I think what we've seen is a lot of attacks happening in less developed countries, in Georgia, in all sorts of, in Kiev, Ukraine, places where a certain nation state is very interested in attacking things and getting their own point of view across. And I think they are not as well equipped to deal with this. They haven't really had the perhaps the firepower to be able to put into cybersecurity that organizations in Western Europe or North America might have done. So I think there is definitely a them and us situation when it comes to this.
Yeah, I mean, the weaponry is internationally available, right? And so it's really a question for every enterprise, large, small, tiny, to sort of make that balance. Like a one-man band journalist is inherently, doesn't have a very big threat surface, doesn't have a staff of, people coming and going. There's some advantages to being small. But at the same time, you're sort of responsible for the security of your own thing. So, you put up your you put up your clips, you keep your home secure, that sort of stuff. Every enterprise has to pick its right size. But I think where this is a little different than some other major subsystems in terms of broadcast procurement is that, you can, as a broadcaster, you can include the EBU R143 questionnaire and things like that. You can read the responses, and you can make sure that all the kind of broadcast equipment you buy has some reasonable security posture. But that doesn't make your enterprise secure. That just removes, or ameliorates one corner of some, it keeps you from inheriting maybe some new challenges. Ultimately, making your enterprise secure is a enterprise management decision that you have to make for yourself. You have to staff it and organize it and plan it and execute on it. It's not, making sure each piece of equipment, when you buy new things, has the right security features. That's good. You should do that. But don't mistake that with solving the enterprise challenge. The enterprise challenge is much, is a whole enterprise, including the people challenge. Because I'll go back to the biggest threat surface in television is the people that come and go every day. And if any person can click on a link in an email and infect their computer, which they can, then you have to have some process by which at least you manage the zone of infection and how big does that spread inside your enterprise.
So we're starting to wind down here. We're kind of coming close to the end, but I wanted to give you guys a chance to sort of pick each other's brains from, or at least the two sides. So I would ask Simon, if you have these two broadcast technology experts here, is there something that your members of the IAB, if you could sort of ask a question on behalf of them, what would it be? What is it that you would want from these guys? What is the help that you would most like?
I think Phil mentioned the importance of knowledge sharing, and I think getting discussions going between the equipment manufacturers and broadcasters is important, and sharing information on potential problems and how to solve them. And if that can be done, I think that goes quite a long way to starting improving the situation. John's absolutely right about, well, both of them are right about the people problem, because it is you and me clicking on links, bringing in USB sticks, getting past physical security and so forth, that can cause big problems. And we've seen that in other industries. So education and sharing ideas, I think, is very important. So that, I think, would be my biggest challenge to the supply side. How can we all come together and share that intelligence that we've all got, so that we can pick up from each other and work out better solutions?
Great. And then Phil and John, what about in terms of the broadcasters? What is it that you would like them to understand, or is there a question you have for Simon about the needs of his members?
I think Simon's right about this point of information sharing, and among broadcasters is the biggest challenge, right? Because we're mostly, as vendors, we're kind of in the trenches doing our gear. We have a CIO team in our company, and they're very good at what they do, and they manage it all well. And they wouldn't mind meeting with the equivalent CIO teams of some of the broadcasters and talking about shared challenges. But I think that the biggest source of information sharing for broadcasters is really each other, particularly as you've got bigger ones and smaller ones. And I believe the EBU has some caucus of the CISOs of the different EBU member broadcasters, but that really only helps them. I don't know what is going on in the larger industry between broadcasters or who's facilitating that kind of communication, but maybe that's a job for Simon's organization to try and facilitate that dialogue among media companies.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think what I always encourage with customers when we sit down with them is for it to be a mutual discussion, because you can take the EBU document and complete it and pass it back, but it doesn't really help you, I'm afraid, if you don't really understand what you're trying to achieve and the infrastructure that you have. And I think we're really, from the Lawo team side perspective, we've kind of moved on from the kind of IP networks, deploying video and audio IP. We've tried to really focus on making it easier to deploy and also look at the security aspect. And that's been a focus for us over the last 6 to 12 months. We're not going to get to the end game, because it's an evolving process, because, as you know, the motivation for people to get in your network can be different depending on the person that's doing it. But we know that the mechanisms are very common, and they can be mitigated using standard IT technology, as long as you have an awareness of it and how you want to deploy that technology. And as we've known, even taking some of the fundamental IT building blocks into professional media networks has been challenging. Just getting customers even to stand up a DHCP server or some of the easy things, a radius server, and some of these things are fairly easy to do, but we still find challenges to do that. And I think as we get into some of the security aspects, you need to really have an approach with a customer where you jointly agree that you're going to tackle this together moving forward. But I do agree with John. I think that there must be some way to pass the information around with the broadcasters, because there are many broadcasters at huge scale, all the way down to small regional broadcast stations that really would not be able to address this, might not even have somebody responsible for it inside their facility. And I think that's quite hard just to say, okay, here's a document, please read this and go and secure it. That's a really hard ask of anybody, I would suggest.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. I think we could explore this even more, but we've run out of time. Simon, Phil, John, thank you very much. And thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.